Chapter 5. The Deplorable World. The children were facing one another across the pillar where the bell hung, still trembling, although it was no longer gave out any noise. Suddenly they heard a soft noise from the end of the room, which was still undamaged. They turned quick as lightning to see what it was. One of the robed figures, the furthest one of all, the woman who Diggory thought was so beautiful, was rising up from her chair. When she stood up, they realized that she was even taller than they had thought. And you could see at once, not only from her crown and robes, but the flash of her eyes and the curve of her lips, that she was a great queen. They looked around the room and they saw the damage. She saw the damage and the children, but you could not guess from her face what she thought of either or whether she was surprised. She came forward with long, swift strokes. "Who has awakened me? Who has broken the spell?" she asked. "I think it must have been me," said Diggory. "You," said the queen, laying a hand on her shoulder. A white, beautiful hand, but Diggory could feel that it was strong as steel pincers. "You? But you're only a child, a common child. Anyone can see at a glance that you have no drop of royal or noble blood in your veins. How did such as you dare to enter this house?" There's the queen. "We've come from another world by magic," said Polly, who thought it was high time the queen took some notice of her as well as Diggory. "Is this true?" said the queen, still looking at Diggory and not giving Polly even a glance. "Yes, it is," he said. The queen put her other hand under his chin and forced it up so she could see his face better. Diggory tried to stare back, but he soon had to let his eyes drop. There was something about hers that overpowered him. After she had studied him for well over a minute, she let go of his chin and said, "You are no magician. The mark of it is not on you. You must be only the servant of a magician. It is on another's magic that you have traveled here." "It was my Uncle Andrew," said Diggory. At that moment, not in the room itself, but from somewhere very close, there came at first a rumbling, and then a creaking, and then a roar of falling masonry, and the floor shook. "There is great peril here," said the queen. "The whole place is breaking up. If we are not out of it in a few minutes, we shall be buried under the ruin." She spoke calmly, as if she had been merely mentioning the time of day. "Come," she added, and held out a hand to each of the children. Polly was disliking the queen and feeling rather sulky, and would not have let her hand be taken if she could have helped it, but though the queen spoke so calmly, her movements were as quick as thought. Before Polly knew what was happening, her left hand had been caught in a hand so much larger and stronger than her own that she could do nothing about it. "This is a terrible woman," thought Polly. "She's strong enough to break my arm with one twist, and now that she's got my left hand, I can't get at my yellow ring. If I tried to stretch across to get my right hand into my left pocket, I mightn't be able to reach it before she asked me what I was doing. Whatever happens, we mustn't let her know about the rings. I do hope Diggory has the sense to keep his mouth shut. I wish I could get word with him alone." The queen led them out of the hall of images into a long corridor, and then through a whole maze of halls and stairs and courtyards. Again and again they heard parts of the great palace collapsing, sometimes quite close to them. Once a huge arch came thundering down, only a moment after they had passed through it, and the queen walked in quickly with the children. The children had to keep up with her, but she showed no signs of fear. Diggory thought, "She's wonderfully brave and strong. She's what I call a queen. I do hope she's going to tell us the story of this place." She did tell them certain things as they went along. "That's the door to the dungeon," she would say. "The passage leads to torture chambers, or this was an old banqueting hall where my great-grandfather bade 700 nobles to a feast and killed them all before they had drunk their fill. They had had rebellious thoughts. Then they came at last to a hall larger and loftier than any they had seen yet. From its size and from the great doors at the far end, Diggory thought that now, at last, they must be coming to the main entrance. In this he was quite right. The doors were dead black, either ebony or some kind of black metal which is not found on our world. They were fastened with great bars, most of them too high to reach and all too heavy to lift. He wondered how they would get out. The queen let go of his hands and raised her arm. She drew herself up to her full height and stood rigid. Then she said something which couldn't be understood, but it sounded horrid, and made an action as if she were throwing something toward the doors. And those high, heavy doors trembled for a second, as if they were made of silk, and then crumbled away, and there was nothing left of them but a huge heap of dust on the threshold. "Phew," said Diggory. "Has your master magician, your uncle, power like mine?" asked the queen, firmly seizing Diggory's hand again. "But I shall know later. In the meantime, remember what you have seen. This is what happens to things and to people who stand in my way." Much more light than they had yet seen in that country was pouring through, and now the now empty doorway, and when the queen had led them out through it, they were not surprised to find themselves in the open air. The wind that blew on their faces was cold, and yet somehow stale. They were looking from a high terrace, and there was a great landscape spread out below them. Low down and near the horizon hung a great red sun, far bigger than our sun. Diggory felt at once that it was also older than ours. The sun near the end of its life, weary of looking down on that world. To the left of the sun, and higher up, there was a single star, big and bright. Those were the only two things to be seen in the dark sky. They made a dismal group. And on the earth, in every direction as far as the eye could see, there spread a vast city in which there was no living thing to be seen. And at the temple, tower palaces, pyramids, and bridges cast along disastrous-looking shadows in the light of that withered sun. Once a great river had flowed through the city, but the water had long since vanished, and now was only a wide ditch of gray dust. "Look well on that which no eye will see again," said the queen. Such was Charm, the great city, the city of the King of Kings, the wonder of the world, perhaps all worlds. "Does your uncle rule any city as great as this boy?" "No," said Diggory. He was going to explain that Uncle Andrew didn't rule any cities, but the queen went on. "It is silent now, but I have stood here when the whole air was full of the noises of Charn. The trampling feet, the cranking of wheels, the cranking of whips, the groaning of slaves, the thunder of chariots, and the sacrificial drums beating in the temples. I have stood here, but that was near the end, when the roar of battle went up from every street and river, and the river in Charn ran red." She paused and added, "All in one moment. One woman blotted it out forever." "Who?" said Diggory in a faint voice, but he had already guessed the answer. "I," said the queen. "I, Jadis, the last queen, the queen of the world." The two children stood silent, shivering in the cold wind. "It was my sister's fault," said the queen. "She drove me to it. May the curse of all powers rest upon her forever. At any moment I am ready to make peace, yes, and to spare her life too, if only she would yield me the throne. But she would not. Her pride has destroyed the whole world, Even after the war had begun, there was a solemn promise that neither side would use magic. But when she broke her promise, what could I do? As if she did not know I had more magic than she. She even knew that I had the secret of the deplorable world. Did she think, she was always a weakling, that I would not use it? What was it? Said Diggory. That was the secret of secrets, said the Queen Jadis. It had been long known to the great kings of our race that there is a word which, if spoken with the proper ceremonies, would destroy all living things except the one who spoke of it. But the ancient kings were weak and soft-hearted and bound themselves to, and all who should come after them, with their great oaths, never to seek after the knowledge of that word. But I learned it in a secret place and paid a terrible price to learn it. I did not use it until she forced me into it. I fought to overcome her by every other means. I poured out the blood of my armies like water. Beast, murmured Polly. The last great battle, said the Queen, raged for 3 days here in Charn itself. For 3 days I looked down upon this very spot. I did not use my power until the last of my soldiers had fallen, and the accursed woman, my sister, at the head of her rebels, was halfway up those great stairs that lead from the city to the terrace. Then I waited until we were so close that we could see one another's face. She flashed her horrible, wicked eyes upon me and said, "Victory!" "Yes," said I, "victory, but not yours." Then I spoke the deplorable word. A moment later, I was the only living thing beneath the sun. "But the people," gasped Diggory. "What people, boy?" asked the Queen. "All the ordinary people," said Polly, "who'd never done you any harm, and the woman and the children and the animals." "Don't you understand?" said the Queen, still speaking to Diggory. "I was the Queen. They were all my people. What else were they there for but to do my will?" "It was rather hard luck on them, all the same," said he. "I had forgotten that you are only a common boy. How should you understand reasons of state? You must learn, child, that what would be wrong for you or for any of the common people is not wrong for a queen as great queen such as I. The weight of the world is on our shoulders. We must be freed from all rules. Ours is a high and lonely destiny." You ever feel like the rules apply to other people but not you? I've done that. It usually gets me in trouble. Diggory suddenly remembered that Uncle Andrew had used those exact same words, but they sounded much grander when Queen Jadis said them, perhaps because Uncle Andrew was not even 7 foot tall, and she was dazzlingly beautiful. "And what did you do then?" said Diggory. "I had already cast strong spells on the hall where the images of my ancestors sit, and force of those spells was that I should sleep among them, like an image myself. I need neither food nor fire, though it were 1,000 years, until one came and struck the bell and awoke me." "Was it the deplorable word that made the sun like that?" "Like what?" said Jadis. "So big, so red, and so cold?" "No, it's always been so," said Jadis. "At least 400 hundreds of thousands of years. Have you a different sort of sun in your world?" "Yes, it's smaller and yellower, and it gives a great deal more heat." The Queen gave a long-drawn "ah," and Diggory saw on her face that same hungry and greedy look which he had lately seen on Uncle Andrew's. "So," she said, "yours is a younger world." She paused for a moment to look once more at the deserted city, as if she were sorry for all the evil she had done there. She certainly didn't show it. And then she said, "Now, let's be going. It's cold here and at the end of the ages." "Go where?" asked both children. Where? Replied Janice in surprise. To your world, of course. Polly and Diggory looked at each other aghast. Polly had disliked the Queen from the first, and even Diggory, now that he had heard the story, felt he had seen quite as much of her as he wanted. Certainly, she was not at all the sort of person one would like to take home. And if they did like, they didn't know how they could. What they wanted to do was get away themselves, but Polly couldn't get at her ring, and of course Diggory couldn't go without her. Diggory got very red in his face and stammered, our world, I didn't know you wanted to go there. What else were you sent here for if not to fetch me? Asked Jadis. I'm sure you wouldn't like our world at all, said Diggory. It's not her sort of place, is it, Polly? It's very dull and not worth seeing, really. It'll soon be worth seeing when I rule it, answered the Queen. Oh, but you can't, said Diggory. It's not like that. They wouldn't let you, you know. The Queen gave a contemptuous smile. Many great kings, she said, thought they could stand against the House of Charn, but they also fell, and their names are forgotten. Foolish boy, do you think I, with my beauty and my magic, would not have your whole world at my feet before a year had passed? Prepare your incantations and take me there at once. This is perfectly frightful, said Diggory to Polly. Perhaps you fear for this uncle of yours, said Jadis, but if he honors me duly, he shall keep his life and his throne. I am not coming to fight against him. He must be a very great magician if he's found how to send you here. Is this king of your whole world or only a part? He isn't a king anywhere, Polly said. You are lying, said the Queen. Does not magic always go with royal blood? Whoever heard of common people being magicians? I can see the truth, whether you speak it or not. Your uncle is a great king and a great enchanter of your world, and by his art he has seen the shadow of my face in some magic mirror or enchanted pool, and for the love of my beauty he has made a potent spell which shook your world to its foundations and sent you across this vast gulf between world and world to ask my favor and to bring him to me. Answer me. Is that not how it was? Well, not exactly, said Diggory. Not exactly, said Polly. Why, it's absolute bosh from beginning to end. Minions, cried the Queen, turning her rage upon Polly and seizing her hair at the very top of her head where it hurt the most. But in so doing, she let go both of the children's hands. Now, said Diggory, and quick, shouted Polly. They plunged their left hands into their pockets. They didn't even need to put the rings on. The moment they touched them, the whole of that dreary world vanished from their eyes, and they were rushing upward, and a warm green light was growing nearer overhead.